Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. It's a new year for us, and I wanted to reflect on how this year looked. It's very different how it was a year ago, and this month's theme is A Brave New World. I heard this phrase many times, but in regards to how I feel presently, I feel it's appropriate. Today we have returning a guest and a friend of mine. Thank you for coming back, Joel. And return to the
No worries, man. Happy to be here. Always a pleasure.
I want to tell those who are listening and watching that if you are in crisis, please seek appropriate professional help immediately. There is a crisis hotline if you're in the United States. It's 1-800-273-8255. It's National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. But I do encourage you to look for your local resources out there. Right now, we're living in a very unique time, and that's what we're going to be talking about. But as tradition for the Revive Ministries Podcast, and I always start with a quote, and it says, every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. I feel in life there are seasons. I got married in September, and some take longer to get to than others. And when we don't focus on the destination, but on the journey, I find it's more helpful personally. Joel, listening to this quote and what comes to mind and any other insight you would like to add?
Oh, I mean, sure. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. Sounds like the closing time, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that where that?
That was in the 90s, right? Yeah, I think of that. But yeah.
No, of course, that's the case. I mean, life is always a constant change. It's an ebb and flow of change, and some changes are more dramatic than other changes. Mm-hmm. And having this ability to weather change has to do with the flexibility that I think makes us who we are, really. I mean, if you can't weather a change, if you can't really roll with the tide, it makes it a lot more difficult to experience joy, to experience everyone, how do I say this? Everyone, loves to be at the top of the wave. Mm-hmm. But I think what sets people apart from those who are, say, extremely successful in life, mm-hmm. Is the ability to still experience joy and happiness even when you're at the bottom of the wave.
Yeah.
Right. Even in the difficult times and the times of suffering, there's something to be thankful for. There's something to rejoice over. There's, the cliche may be a silver lining, but,
yeah.
But the reality is that I think some of the best leaders in our world have gone through, peaks and valleys. Mm-hmm. And what sets them apart is the ability to remain flexible, to remain focused, even in difficult times, and to kind of see things in the bigger picture. So yeah, every new beginning comes from some kind of end of something else, some kind of new beginning of a chapter. I think that's a great quote.
Yeah, and the one constant is change, in this world. And one thing that I remember in October, this is going to be uploaded in January, the new year, but in October, there was this quote I used, and I'm probably skipping ahead, but I think it's appropriate what we've been talking about. It's from Albert Einstein. It says, the measure of intelligence is the ability to change. That's it. There's a lot of, and I'm not saying this, I'm not minimizing those who go to school and who are very knowledgeable and scholarly and all that stuff. But I do find that we kind of overlook emotional IQ. The idea of being able to adapt to change, to be able to go through situations, because a lot of times it's how we communicate, how we view the world, kind of how we shape the world for us. There's some of the most intelligent people, if they don't have a voice, if they're not able to connect or share it, it doesn't, for me, I find that I guess the best way I could say, I know a lot of times I use quotes because I know people say it better than I do. Let's just be honest. Now, a lot of people say things It's from Daniel Goleman. He says, if your emotional abilities aren't in hand, if you don't have self-awareness, if you are not able to manage your distressing emotions, if you can't have empathy and have effective relationships, then no matter how smart you are, you're not going to get very far. It's pretty brutal.
Yeah.
But I feel like the connections and being self-aware really shapes it, how we look at life and how we look at new beginnings and the fresh start. We're talking about a brave new world. Any comment or insight when you're thinking about this thread of ideas of change?
Well, change happens whether you like it or not. I mean, it's going to take place. It's so many things are out of our control.
Yeah.
We've been in a pandemic for a long time now. Of course, you said you're uploading this in January, but right now we're in the election cycle.
Yeah,
we're in the election season.
Yeah,
we're rolling into the November, not the date this podcast, but we're rolling into we're just like a week away from what will probably be a chaotic time.
Yes.
Arguments over vote counting and a number of things. But whether it's an election that brings change or whether it's like we've been dealing with a virus that brings change, some of the changes are good and easier to adapt to. And some of the changes really take a struggle to make something new out of it. Yeah. Right. They really take a lot of effort and a lot of intentionality to bring something new out of it. So, I remember when I was a kid, Christopher Columbus wasn't a controversial figure.
Yeah.
Now Christopher Columbus, he's the guy who came to America and brought disease and raped and pillaged.
Yeah.
But I remember the story from when I was a kid about Christopher Columbus and how, he knew the vulnerability of more primitive people in the what he thought was the route to India, the West Indies.
Yeah.
And he was kind of stranded on an island, and he had a astronomer's guide. I mean, of course, people who were on the sea, they lived off of they traveled by the stars, right?
Yeah.
So he knew like when a solstice was going to happen.
Yeah.
And of course, the people who were the island that he was on in the Indies, West Indies, they were getting kind of tired of him camping out, being stranded with his ship, waiting for reinforcements to come from Europe to help him. And they were ready to kill him. They were gonna off with his head kind of thing. And as the story goes, he was able to predict accurately, and they saw him as a god, as a prophet, because he predicted that a solstice was not a solstice, but an eclipse was going to happen. Okay. Well, fast forward to 2020, and those kind of primitive people don't exist anymore.
Yes.
Right. We don't have people who don't understand that there are these celestial kind of things that happen, these predictable, highly predictable movements of the stars and the sun and the moon and the tide and all this kind of scientific stuff. We're kind of past all of that, right? Like the world has had to adapt. No one could go to no one could pull the wool over the eyes of some chieftain and a tribal leader of some little island in the West Indies. Like that couldn't happen today, right? And not because those people wanted to change, but because they had to change, right? So that's just that's kind of a silly example of things that have happened on a much more macro level in the world that we're in, right? You can't stand up today and say, I mean, there's something that really boggles my mind about mask deniers, right? Masks have been working effectively for about 150 years. And I mean, surgeons have been using them to prevent infection for a very, very long time. I mean, we don't need to have some great study on whether, the common sense alone, right? Masks keep saliva from spraying out of your mouth. But yet there are still people who will argue the point as to whether they do anything or not.
Yeah.
And I think this is because people are very slow and resistant to change.
Yes.
Even when it seems to be the very simplest thing, very slow and resistant to change. I see three kinds of people in the world, and being a pastor, I've seen this, over and over again. There are early adopters. There are people that they can perceive it. It's like they just know it's coming. They're in tune with the world around them, and they're like, man, this is change. Like they may look at something as politically controversial as climate change, right? And say, yeah, but there's this opportunity there to help transition into a new way of doing things. Whether you agree with it or not, they're on board for change. They're able to see that change is coming, even if they don't agree with it all, and they're able to adapt to it, right?
Yeah.
And then the second group of people are people like the laggards. The laggards are like, they don't get it at first, but with a little bit more evidence, a little bit more experience with what's happening, they're able to get on board and then perceive change and start to change their lives and reorient their lives as well, right?
Yeah.
Then there are, the people that will never, ever, ever change. Those who are resistant to change. In fact, they become even a little bit obstructionist, obstructionistic to change. Like they're never going to accept it, never going to adapt to it. It's a primitive kind of part of the human makeup that it's in many of us, right? And what makes that so dangerous is you either change or you die.
Yeah.
In many cases, right?
And
you change or you die.
Yeah, it's like this idea, like a lot of times, I'm not saying all the time, but sometimes that started with fear and this thought, this illusion that we could control certain circumstances or comfort. Complacency is a toxic thing if it's not left unchecked. But one thing that I like about when I thought about change, we're talking about a fresh start, is a lot of times people try to force change externally, from the outside. And it doesn't change. I remember when I was, when you're a kid, and the teacher's like, do not do this. The first thing you want to do is that, whatever it is. So like for me, it's
like I remember the Liberty briefs in the military. It's like, here's all the off limits place. Well, that's where everyone's going.
That's where everyone's going. But the funny thing about it is like, when people are dependent, they're like, okay, if we only just make people not do this, let's just make a law or a restriction. People find unique ways to break them because there's no change there. You're just adding more, because what I found, at least in my personal life, I know that, I've known you for a while, Joel, and I learned a lot from just being around you and also the people after. And what I've learned is that I see more change when I'm just sitting there listening than talking. Because a lot of times I would say that there's many more, but in my support groups that I facilitate, what I hear the most they complain about is not being heard. And right now, as we head into the holidays, it's family is the biggest stressor. And it's kind of crazy because a lot of people will say, family, holidays are this urgency to like have these moments of time, kind of time capsule wise, but relationships don't work that way. They're not static. They keep changing and we keep changing. So if you're just going to sit there and say, I'm not going to change, I find those people to be very structured and not willing to change even more later on. So,
sure. And there's consequences.
Yeah.
There's consequences that are, can be observed in real time. And then there's consequences that, may not even be observed in your lifetime. Right. You think of family dynamics. Well, a lot of the family dynamics that we've inherited are out of our control. Like, they were passed down from people we've never even met in many cases, right? We have personality traits, and we have family history, and you have the way that we were parented. Like, I think of my grandfather who died of COVID. I think about my mom being raised by him, and he was a hard Marine. Like, he ran the household like that, and that was passed on to him by his father, who made him live out in the barn and do all the chores, and treated him really poorly, fed him like, very little amounts of food, and but made him work really hard. And then he was eventually like adopted by the neighbors when he was about 12, 13 years old. And he just had a really rough childhood. Yeah. Well, so much of that, without him even knowing, was passed into his own children. Yeah. And I never even met my great grandfather, but I know that I've experienced him through my parents. Why? Because these things get passed on, and there's consequences that we don't even realize. Yeah. But one thing that I love about the ability to reflect on these things and to put them into perspective and to evaluate how it happened and why it happened is that we get the chance to then stop these kinds of things from running in the family, right? Yeah. We get the chance to bring different kind of change that is, much more intentional rather than just haphazard or accidental, right? Yeah. And some of the real-time changes that we're experiencing right now, you think of like how long we've lived with viruses. I mean, we've lived our whole lives with viruses, right? Yes. Yeah. What are the social consequences of treating this one so much different from other viruses like the flu or whatever it is? And the social consequences can be pretty dramatic. Yeah. I mean, elderly people in nursing homes who can't spend time with their family. Oh yeah. Families who can't spend Thanksgiving and Christmas together, feeling free like they used to have, the social dynamic they had. Even households, like I think of my household, we become a little bit paranoid about our kids going off to a public school or going off into a school setting that we want to pull them back in and make them more virtual. Like some of the consequences we're seeing in real time, that this change, not all change is positive. Yeah. Whether we like it or not, we have to adapt to it. But there is real time observable consequences that are not always good, right? Yeah, they're not that good. And what the long-term effect of these changes are, they're not in our wheelhouse yet. We're not able to grasp what the long-term, we can imagine them. We can try to foresee them. We can try to predict them and then adapt beforehand of what they might be. But I think the strength comes in having the flexibility, that even though we don't know every change that's coming, we don't know every change that's ahead of us, that we hold on to some principles. We hold on to some values that are superior to whatever change would come. So, if family is a high value for us, or if life is a high value for us, then we would then tailor the way we're going to change to what those major values are, those major principles in our life are. And then we're not the kind of people that just change isn't like we're just a flag blowing in the breeze. Because if change is that, if it's flexible to the point where we're just a flag like blowing in the breeze, well, I mean, then we have no purpose in life. We have no meaning in life. We have nothing spiritual to hold on to, right? So it isn't as if change means no structure, right? Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense, because like whenever I feel like when we realize how little we know, how little control we have, and like one thing I notice in recovery and in the circles I'm around is that you do a whole lot of healing when you start focusing on what you do have and not what you don't have. I don't care who you are. Like for me, I've seen, unfortunately, some people, we're getting to the holidays, and when this uploads, the holidays will pass. But holidays are very hard for people, and rightfully so. because families we're the most vulnerable to, and sometimes the things we're most vulnerable will get hurt the most. And for me,
oh sure,
it's just like the idea that relationships are a risk. They are, and there's no cheating that way, because it just makes complacent views on relationships, and it also builds bad habits and not being intentional. But when it comes to relationships, they're one of the most precious things in your life that you remember, but also the most damaging. I had some guests who had some very damaging experiences in their life, but I still would say that if we start focusing on what we do have versus what we don't, I'm not minimizing what you're going through. There's plenty of people who are struggling right now. I remember the church I go to in Palm Coast. There's a young person who passed away right on the onset. And imagine they can't even mourn the way they would want to, not like they would want to mourn at that particular junction. So I just want to ask you a few quotes. There's a few quotes, because during October, November, December, now this is January, there were a few quotes that I kind of shared, used as a kind of base of discussion. There's one quote, it says, everything you want is on the other side of fear. What is your thoughts on that? It's from Jack Canfield. And we kind of talked about changing fear comes from. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I mean, I think it's a great quote. Everything you want is on the other side of fear. Some things are worth being afraid of.
Oh yeah.
There's some worthy things to be afraid of out there. So really, I think when it comes to being crippled by fear, that's the difference, right? Like you can have a little bit of anxiety or a little bit of intrepidation over a situation or a fear of the unknown, right? But to lose your sense of adventure or to lose your sense of risk taking, to be completely risk adverse, it definitely means you're not going to gain anything. You think about you're in a marriage now. You've been married, and Joanne, I'm sure, and you, as you start out your new life together, there's going to be a lot of decisions you have to make where you're not going to know what the exact implications of them are going to be. You didn't know that when you decided that you were going to end up in a relationship together. You didn't know where it was going to take you at first. And the real thing is like somebody has to make the first move. Somebody has to take the risk. Somebody has to be willing to be an explorer, right? I'm going to be going into the Army as a chaplain. I just got my orders. Okay, I'll be stationed in Fort Bliss. By the time this is airing, I'll be in chaplain candidate school. I'll be like, I'll be in chaplain officer basic. Chaplain officer basic.
Yeah,
I've been a pastor for many years. Okay, like I'm old now. I'm 40, right? My body's. I'm afraid that my body's not going to handle. The kind of stuff I'm going to have to do in training that some of these younger guys can do with no problem. Because I know what my body worked like at 25, right? But there's an element of confidence in yourself and confidence that you can do things that you never even thought you could do, that defies logic, but it is what leads people into overcoming fear. Okay. Like there's the real stupid, irresponsible kind of confidence that you have when you're 18, 19 years old. That is because your frontal lobe is not quite developed. That's not what I'm talking about. But you can have confidence that if you take a risk, that if you weigh the risk versus reward, in most cases, if you do that, just so simple, evaluation of risk versus reward, in many cases, you'll see that taking the risk is well worth it. I mean, in some cases, what do you have to lose?
Yeah.
Where am I at if I don't take the risk? Well, right where I am right now. Well, I don't want to be where I am right now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I don't make a movement forward, then I'm gonna just continue to experience the same thing I've always experienced, right?
Yeah.
So what was the quote again? It was fear.
Everything you want is on the other side of fear.
Yeah, everything you want is on the other side of the fear. Of fear. Well, fear really keeps you from making movement forward.
Yes.
Right. And I like what the Bible says. The Bible says that God hasn't given us a spirit of fear. Right. Mm-hmm. In fact, in some translations, it says a spirit of intent of timidity. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, if you think you're gonna cross 6 lanes of traffic, like walk across the highway, and come out of the other side without getting nailed, you know, that's just that's irresponsible.
That's reckless. For me, when I think
recklessness.
For me, there's that difference. The courage is not the absence of fear. It's just continue moving with the fear. Like fear doesn't go away when it comes. You have to make a choice. Thomas Edison said this way: "Our greatest weakness lies in giving up. The most certain way to succeed is always to try just one more time." That's it. Mm-hmm. Like when you used to work out, like when you're at your best shape, you're with your buddy, you're like, one more time, and you're doing like a bench press or something, and if you're counting your head, we're already done. It's like one more time, it's like pushing you a little bit further, making you a little bit uncomfortable.
And courage is what overcomes that.
Yeah, right? yeah. And I just, for me, we're talking, fresh start. It's, Joel, you've been such a great friend to me for so long, and it's just nice to have some insight that, at first, when I first came to Florida, I didn't value. I used to thought, because I put people in the box, like everyone does, the whole like stereotype. And, if I look back, I kind of go back to when my dad went to the church and my mom didn't. I got sick and no one went to visit me. And my mom said, "You don't have to go." I remember this clearly. And then I went with my dad. I went to primary class. And, you got to be careful who's in there, because I remember I didn't know stuff. Because we didn't talk about the Bible in the church at home. And the way they made me feel of not knowing stuff, I said, I'm not going to be here. So I just stayed with my dad. So church for me for the longest time was not a safe place. It was just only safe if my dad was there. So I just went as a kid. So when I think about that, it makes me remember how important our connections are, as much as we try to lie to ourselves. At the same time, change first, having that change, like in the beginning, it says every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. Changes.
Closing time.
Closing time. Yeah, and and for you're gonna be a chaplain in the Army, and that's wonderful. And a lot of people who maybe watched this or even thought of me even 3 years ago was like, Rob married, Rob doing what he's doing. But the thing is, what I've learned is a lot of times there's risk, but the connections we make and our willingness to go through it. I needed all that time. I'll tell you that much. I needed all that time because I was hurt. I was broken, I was struggling. But one thing I've learned and I want to kind of wrap things up, and I'm going to ask you kind of a little final thoughts you want to share with those listening. The one thing I learned last year when I was going through some of my therapy was you can't help everyone, and that's okay. Another thing I learned was my parents, I love them to death, but I can never pay them back, and that's okay. These are crazy thoughts, but if anyone knows me,
nor do you have to.
Nor do you have to. And I'm not responsible of their emotions, because they're people too. It's crazy. Yeah. These ideas were really foreign to me and really hard for me to get to those points, but they were very helpful. And it's just a mindset. You have to continue working on these thoughts and these coping. And obviously for me and Joel, we have our faith that we lean on too. So Joel, what do you want to share with those who are listening on this brand new year, 2021? and a fresh start, well, what advice would you give them? Any final thoughts?
Well, I think you just summed it up pretty well. The thing that I would say is that you could do anything you want, but you can't do everything you want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it's illogical to think that in one lifetime you could do everything that you want to do, right? That you could really accomplish everything you want to do. So you have to pick and choose. You have to decide what you want to do. You know, you can do anything you want, but you can't do everything you want. And you know, what that means is if it's a new year and you're deciding that this year, you know, you're going to set some resolutions, you know, you're going to make some major changes in your life. Some of those changes in your life just probably should have been made a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, you're a product. We're all a product of our environment, where we grew up, how we grew up, the kind of personality traits we have. But all of those things can be overcome by simply just making good choices, just making well thought choices, intentional choices, surveying the land, surveying where you are, and you know, mapping out where you want to go, understanding that, you know, the route's going to change, but at least give yourself a big picture idea of where you want to go and where you want to be. You know, I wanted to be a chaplain 20 years ago. I never thought it was going to happen because of some things that I was going to have to overcome, but I didn't give up on that idea, you know. I've been pastoring for, you know, 15 years. I've kept myself grounded and working with people. Like, even if it didn't happen, that was way on the horizon, that I could, you know, end up back in the military. I was in the Marine Corps 7 years. You know, when I became a Christian, I went through a dramatic story, a dramatic experience. I'll save you the details on that. But you know, that made the horizon for being a chaplain far, far away. And, you know, I have all the degrees I need. I have all the experience I need. I kept myself moving on a path to serving people because that's the ultimate desire. I looked at the bigger picture and decided that, you know, ministry has a lot of different forms, and I don't have to be settled on this one thing, but I don't want to give up on this one thing. I want to keep my life, you know, moving in that trajectory, that direction. And it's paid off. I mean, that's going to happen for me. Now, I don't know what happens after that happens.
Yes.
Right? Like, you know, I'll start setting the next goals. I'll start setting the next things in front of me. But it isn't just dangling a carrot in front of you. Actually, the stick is a big part of getting to the carrot. Right? Like, you have to have a direction, and you have to set a course, and that course isn't always going to go the way you want it to go. But man, it sure is a lot better than just meandering around in circles, and like next thing you know, you pass the same tree 15 times. Right?
Well, you know, we learn more.
Movement forward.
Yeah, the things we learn more from our failures than we do our successes, and you know,
I think so.
Sometimes the pain is necessary. You know, sometimes the pain, we kind of frown against it, but sometimes pain brings up, at least for me, and brought up awareness of what I needed at the time. That was it.
Yeah.
You know, I just want to say thank you, Joel, so much for sharing your insight with us today. Remember to stay updated. By
the way, Rob, before you close, you know, going through all the things you're going through, or you have gone through, or you will go through, the simplest way I think you can look at it is to think, man, I'm a much more interesting person because of it. Like, how boring of a person would I be if I had never gone through anything?
Yeah,
right?
it allows me to relate better to people because I understand it's not just linear. Like, people have a lot of context, and it makes me a more approachable, and I like that, and it helps me because just like Joel, I love to serve. The service became my recovery and my healing in the end. So
but you don't only serve, and that's the thing. See, like, we're not one dimensional. And if we were one dimensional, if you're I'm just a servant, that's all I do. I just do things for other people. No, I also want to enjoy my own life, you know, and I have to have boundaries. I can't serve everybody, like you said. Yeah. You know, I can't do everything for everybody. Like, my life matters too. And Yeah, I mean, that's really good. And you're multi-dimensional. You're not homogenous.
No.
You have a lot of facets.
Yeah, so like when I say service, for me, that's an important side. Like Joel's saying, it's an important side, but it's not every side. Because like we need boundaries, and we learned that with COVID. We learned to pause and not put so much urgency in our lives. Because if we do, we're chasing something that sometimes causes more harm than good, because we don't put enough value in peace of mind. And I think we should start, because peace of mind sometimes is really beneficial for our overall wellness. Again, thank you, Joel, for
well said.
being a part of this whole, being a returning guest and everything you do. I just want to share those who are listening. Remember to stay updated with all things Revive Ministries through all the various platforms. ReviveMinistriesFL.com is the website. It's on Facebook, Instagram, and on YouTube. This is goodbye from Revive Ministries Podcast, leaving you with this last quote. It's from Albert Einstein again. It says, "Anyone who has never made a mistake has never tried anything new."